All right, we struggled a little bit with clearing the fraction out of algebraic equations, so I'm going to do a couple problems, and I'm not going to go ahead and solve them, but I'm going to go ahead and clear the fraction for you so you can watch that process. You don't have to do this. Of course, if you have a calculator, it doesn't really matter anyway. You could just say, okay, what did they do? They did this and this, so I need to subtract 3/4, divide by 1/2. Of course, a better way than dividing by 1/2 is just to take it times 2, multiply by the reciprocal. But we're going to talk about how to clear that fraction, because a lot of people get confused. They don't really like doing problems with this many fractions in it. So I need basically a common denominator for 2, 4, and 7, and that will be a number that when I multiply by that number will knock out 2, 4, and 7. So 2 and 4 have a common factor of 2, so I don't really need to take 2 times 4 times 7. I just need to take 4 times 7. And so 28 would knock out all three of those numbers. So let me show you what we're essentially doing. I'm distributing 28 times this whole thing. Remember, both sides have to be taken times 28. Now, when this side needs to be taken times 28, I'll need to use, every term will need to be multiplied by 28. So it's essentially a gigantic distributive property problem. So, two ways to do that. Of course, you can cross simplify. That's the whole reason we're doing this. 14 and 1, so you get 14g. That would become a 1 and a 7, so 7 times 3 is 21. This would become a 1 and a 4, so 4 times 5 is 20. And most people would rather be looking at this problem, 14g plus 21 equals 20. Much easier to deal with. All we've done is we've made it 28 times bigger than it was. It's still equal. It's still equal, so we can still solve it. All right. Another hint I have for you with clearing the fraction is if you are dealing with a mixed number, make it an improper fraction. So I'm going to change this to 11/3. Now you could take this just times 6, because that would knock out both 3 and 2. But one confusing thing for people is how many terms are there? Because this really is just one big term on the left-hand side, 11/3 times this quantity, 1/2 p plus 6. So really, this thing would need to be taken times 6, and this thing would need to be taken times 6. So I really just take this times 6 and then distribute it, which would clear that out. What I found for this class anyway this year is most of you wanted to distribute first, and that's fine. So let me go ahead and do that. I'll distribute to bust these out of jail, and then I'll clear the fraction. So that would be 11/6 p plus 66/3 equals -2. Now notice I didn't multiply this because I'm not clearing the fraction. I was just distributing to bust those out of jail. So now I'm going to multiply by 6 to clear the fraction. So once again, this cancels each other out and we get 11p. This becomes a 1 and a 2, so I get 132. And 6 times -2 is -12. We have a two-step algebraic equation, which is much easier to solve than the one that you were looking at just a moment ago. And all I essentially did was take 6 times this, and this, like a gigantic distributive property. So here's another one where we have a whole bunch of fractions, kind of ugly. So still do leaf change opposite, all that same stuff. I would suggest, once again, since most of us were wanting to do that, rather than finding 4, 5, and 10 and finding out that 20 would knock out all those, to go ahead and do the distributive property, bust these guys out, and then we'll clear the fraction. So if I multiplied this by 2, I would get 6/5 m plus -10. Now I've cleared the fraction, so let me recopy that whole thing down. Now once again I want to knock out the 4, the 5, and the 10. So I'm going to take this whole thing times 20. So this becomes a 1 and a 5, so I end up with 5m. This becomes a 1 and a 4, so I end up, oops, that wasn't supposed to be in, yeah it was. Okay, sorry. 1/4, where was I? 1 and 4, so that becomes 24m. 20 times -10 is -200. Notice I'm doing this. I've done this whole side so far. Getting ready to go to the other side, because the other side also needs to be multiplied by 20. So that becomes a 1 and a 2. 1 and a 2, so 6. By the way, another shortcut is sometimes it's easier just to multiply the tops. 60 divided by 10 is 6. And then -6 times 20 is -120. Of course, then we would go on and we would combine our like terms. 29m plus negative 200 equals 6m plus negative 120. Variables on both sides, subtract one set, do all that stuff. But essentially it gets us down to a much easier problem without all the ugly fractions that we started with. Does it take a little work? This one apparently took a lot of work. Of course, I was working it out kind of long in explanation, but most of us enjoyed or preferred to bust them out of jail with distributed property and then find what we need to multiply the entire quantity by.